Hi, I'm Sherry Stock, and I'm one of the directors at Camp Kodiak. And during the year, I'm a special education teacher in Ontario. Now, for the last few weeks, I've been working on IEPs. And so I've been consulting with a lot of teachers about the teaching strategies that they might use to help their learners be successful. And in having these conversations, I've been thinking a lot about prompts. And what I'm referring to are the types of cues that parents or teachers or instructors give to learners when they're trying to master a new concept. For our purposes, we are going to talk about 4 basic types of prompts today. Physical prompts, modeling, verbal prompts, and visual prompts.
All my good friends, I know they're up ahead just around the bend. Tomorrow is sweet, cause we're all gonna meet at Kodiak.
So physical prompts are the first kind I'm going to talk about, and they're the most intensive type of prompt. And a physical prompt is any time the instructor is having to physically touch the learner in order to direct them about how to do a skill or the next step in a process, or to direct them away from making a mistake. So, for example, when a very young child is learning to hold a pencil or a marker, very often their parent will wrap their hand around the child's hand and help them make a mark on the page. That's called a hand-over-hand prompt, and that's one kind of physical prompt. But a yoga instructor would use physical prompts to help reposition your body, or a golf instructor might use physical prompts to move your hands so you've got the perfect grip on the golf club. The next type of prompt is modeling. And in modeling, the instructor doesn't actually touch the learner, but they do show step by step how to do something, and the learner imitates what the instructor is doing. So for example, a karate instructor who's teaching a new kata would model each of the steps and the learners would imitate. A language instructor who was trying to teach new vocabulary would say a word and then the students would repeat it. Or even a math teacher who's trying to teach the steps of long division might write out the problem on the blackboard while the students copy each of the steps in their notebook. Those are all examples of modeling. The third type of prompt is verbal prompts. And those are probably our most used kind of prompt. And it's any time the instructor is saying something to help direct the learner in order to be successful. So for example, a driving instructor uses verbal prompts constantly. They say, remember to keep your hands at 10 and 2 on the wheel, and accelerate away from the corner, and check your blind spot before you change lanes. Those are all verbal prompts. A parent who calls up to their child in the shower, don't forget to wash behind your ears, is using a verbal prompt. And the elementary school teacher who says to the child, now what letter goes at the end of that word to help the vowel say its name? Another type of verbal prompt. The last kind of prompts we're going to talk about are visual prompts. And visual prompts are any kind of visual item that a learner could refer to help remind them what needs to be done in order to demonstrate the skill. So kindergarten teachers might use a big red stop sign on their door so that the students know that they have to stay within the classroom and they can't leave the classroom during their play. Other types of visual prompts might be a visual schedule, or really any kind of schedule or list or calendar or post-it note that reminds you what you need to do. Those are all types of visual prompts. Now I introduce these 4 kinds of prompts in a specific order because they go from the most intensive prompt, being physical prompts, to the least intensive, being visual prompts. And we always want to move our learners along that continuum to help them be as independent as possible in whatever skill they're learning. But it's not really a linear process, so sometimes you need to go back and forth between the prompts, and not every learner will require every type of prompt to learn every type of skill. So we tend to make 2 kinds of mistakes in the way we use prompts. The first mistake is we sometimes underuse prompts. And of course, the second mistake is that we overuse prompts. And these mistakes are actually related, and they, for the most part, they actually have the same solution. So first, let's talk about underusing prompts. Sometimes when we've given an instruction and we know the person's understood the instruction, or we've taught a skill and we think we've been pretty thorough, if the learner fails to master that skill or follow that instruction, we have a tendency to blame them, to say you weren't paying attention or you weren't trying hard enough. And we need to consider the possibility that there's been some sort of failure or something missing in our instructions, that we haven't scaffolded that learning enough for the learner to be successful. So let me give you an example. Let's say you were driving to someplace new that you've never been before, and somebody gives you directions. Now, if those directions are very, very simple and straightforward, and you're familiar with the area, you may only need to hear them once or to see the map just once, and you can be successful in getting there. But if it's a new area of the city and you've never been there, and the instructions are really complex, then you're going to need more than one repetition. Even if you understood them, you might need more than 10 repetitions to be able to get there, to find your destination. And if you get hopelessly lost, it may not actually be your fault. There's probably something missing in your directions. And the same goes for kids. When we're teaching them something, if they're just not getting it, even though we think we've done a pretty thorough job, we need to figure out what kind of supports that we can give them so that they can be independent and successful in this skill. And often the thing that will help bridge the gap between our instructions and their independence and their success is a visual prompt. So we need to think about how we can integrate visual prompts into our teaching so that our kids can be successful. Now, the opposite problem is overusing prompts. And this happens often because the instructor or the parent sort of embeds that prompt in kind of a habit. And it's more about what the person says than it is about what the learner needs. So for example, it's really appropriate and expected for a driving instructor to remind you to check your blind spot or to signal your lane changes and all of that. But if your spouse is doing that when they're sitting in the front seat, that gets pretty annoying. So that's one of the consequences of overprompting. It can be really annoying to the learner. But the more serious consequence actually is that the person becomes prompt dependent, that there's been no requirement for them to commit that skill to memory or the routine to memory because somebody's there to prompt them. And because they haven't committed it to memory, they actually need you to be there to continue to prompt them in order to be able to demonstrate that skill. One of the ways that we can sort of judge for ourselves whether our kids have become prompt dependent is we have to listen to those situations where we hear ourselves nagging. If we're nagging, there's a really good chance that we are overusing verbal prompts and that our kids have become dependent on those verbal prompts in order to demonstrate the skill that we're trying to get from them. So if you're hearing yourself nagging, consider putting in a visual prompt to give more of that control and more of that responsibility back to the child. So instead of waiting for you to tell them to brush their teeth or do their homework or whatever it is, they actually refer to their schedule, they refer to a list or a routine that you've got set up. Then you have a visual prompt to help them and they can be more successful and more independent. So if visual prompts are such a powerful tool, why don't we use them more? And I think there are really two parts to this answer. The first is that they take some prep work. The other types of prompts rely on an adult being there with the learner and noticing the error as it's happening and then stepping in to correct it. And it happens in the moment and it doesn't take any prep. Visual prompts require you to anticipate where the problem is going to be and create some sort of a visual that's going to help the learner, overcome that obstacle and be able to be successful. So that's the first reason. The second reason is that I think people are under the mistaken impression that visual prompts are geared more towards younger kids and that maybe their kids have outgrown them. And the truth is we never outgrow visual prompts. I use 100, every single day. I have a calendar on my phone. I've got a day planner on my desk. I've got a family calendar on my fridge. I've got to-do lists and post-it notes all over the place to make sure that I am on track. And these are all types of visual prompts. So let me give you a few examples right now to help you figure out how you might use visual prompts at home or at school with different age kids. So first, an at-home example. If your child is having difficulty mastering a routine, so that could be getting ready for school in the morning or getting ready for bed at night, or even all the steps for taking a shower, what you can do is make a list. If your child is a reader, then make a standard list. And if your child is not a reader, then maybe make a list with symbols or pictures. And you can have your child go through that list You can put the list in a plastic sleeve and give your child a whiteboard marker, and they can actually tick things off as they go. At school, for an elementary school child, maybe they know that for more difficult addition problems, they need to carry the 1. But when they come to do it on their own, they always forget and they write it down at the bottom and their answer is completely wrong. So what you can do is you can take a highlighter and just put a little mark over the tens column, and that will cue the child that something goes there. And then hopefully after a few repetitions, they'll remember that that 1 goes there, and they will eventually not need that highlighter, and you can fade that visual prompt. If you've got a high school child who is always coming to class unprepared, what you can do is color code their timetable and put it up in their locker. And you make sure that the colors on the timetable match the colors of the binders that they use for that course. So they open their locker, they see that they're going to their red course, which is English, and they take their red binder. And then they're going to science, which is green, and they grab their green binder. And in that way, those visual cues will help them be successful and be more independent. And they'll be able to, get on with their day. So the takeaway is this. If your child is having difficulty mastering a skill, you need to think of ways to scaffold their learning a little bit more. And often the solution is creating visual prompts. So you need to analyze where their difficulty lies, and you need to create some sort of visual, whether it's a list or a picture, that will help them bridge the gap and overcome that difficulty. Once the visual prompt is created, you need to direct your child to refer to it, and you may need to teach them how to use it. And once they know how to use it, you're going to take a step back, and you're going to let your child use that visual prompt and gain that independence. And hopefully over time, some of those visual prompts will be able to be faded. But realistically, all of us use visual prompts throughout our lives. And so teaching our kids how to use them and eventually how to make them for themselves is really a life skill worth investing in. I hope this has been helpful. As always, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out.